So I would like to introduce the person who needs no introduction, seriously, because you've been up here several times already. Mr. Kenneth Morris Jr., who has a wealth of history and knowledge and purpose and power running through your veins and in your mind. Please join us on the stage.
I'm so honored to be here today. Humbling is the best way I can describe the feeling that I have right now. I want to thank you all. Thank you for the honors. I mentioned I felt like I'm at the Oscars right now. And there is a Frederick Douglass movie coming at some point. I'd like to thank all the dignitaries that are here, the freedom fighters who struggled and laid the groundwork for all of us to be able to do the work today, and the struggle continues. You know, every time I introduce myself, and I have to say I'm the great-great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass. You notice it's hard to count. And the great-great-grandson of Booker T. Washington. Not only is it a mouthful, trying to spit out all of those words, but sometimes it makes me feel very far removed. And you might be sitting there having a hard time trying to imagine what my connection is to Douglass and to Washington. It's like trying to picture what $1 billion looks like with so many zeros. But many people knew a grandparent. Some of you may have even known a great-grandparent. And that's how close I feel to both of my ancestors. Because you see, my great-grandmother, Fanny Douglass, to whom I was very close, she lived to be 103 years old. And she met Frederick Douglass when she was a little girl. She didn't know that she was going to grow up and marry his grandson, Joseph, but that's what happened. And my Aunt Portia, to whom I was also very close, she lived to be 95, was Booker T. Washington's daughter. And I remember being a little boy and sitting on my great-grandmother Fanny Douglass's lap as she would tell me what it was like to know, as she would call him, the man with the great big white hair. And I remember sitting on my Aunt Portia's lap, and she would tell me firsthand stories about her father, Booker T. Washington. And several years ago, I was with a group of students. They were 5th and 6th graders, and they were looking at me cross-eyed like, man, you are so far removed. And what does all of this history have to do with my life today? And why are you talking about these people that lived so long ago? And so I was trying to give them some context to help them wrap their minds around the distance between the generations. And I had this thought that I think was kind of profound, that hands that actually touched the great Frederick Douglass and hands that touched the great Booker T. Washington also touched mine. So in a sense, even with all of those greats, I can say I stand one person away from history. I stand one person away from each man, and I stand one person away from slavery. We're not that far removed from the history of slavery in this country, and I've had the honor and privilege since we started our organization, the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives in 2007, to travel around the country and dialogue with tens of thousands of students who are inspired by this history. Now, before I jump into my remarks, I do have to give thanks to my great-great-great-grandmother, Anna Murray Douglass, because there would be no Frederick Douglass without Anna Murray Douglass. They were married for 44 years. They had 5 children together and 21 grandchildren together. She was the first person that put the seed of thought in his mind that he was not meant to be a slave. And when they met in Baltimore, she was born free and he was enslaved in Baltimore. And as they were interacting with each other and starting to fall in love and starting to think about a life together, she said, "Frederick, you're not meant to be a slave for life. I don't care what your master says." And she said, "I don't want our children's father to be a slave." History is important for a lot of reasons. I like to think history is most important because we need to know where we've come from in order to know where we're headed. And we're making history today. We're making history. We're going to change the course of history in the way that we've interacted and the lessons that we've learned and what will be spreading and reverberating beyond this field today. We will change the course of history. And think about this. Had Anna not put that seed of thought in his mind, who knows if he would have ever had the courage to run away from slavery. And we would be a very different country today had we not had the contributions of Frederick Douglass as the abolitionist. So we are just as proud of Anna as we are of Frederick. Yeah. Now, I have to get something out of the way because I've already been asked a couple of times. I get two questions when people meet me for the first time. And one of them is, so you're related to Frederick Douglass and to Booker T. Washington? But what do you do? And they always follow that up with, and it better be good. So if you can imagine, there has been a little bit of pressure in my life trying to carry around this weight of expectation and trying to live up to the legacies of these two great American heroes. And the other question that I get is, so I know that Douglass and Washington weren't related to each other. How is it you're related to both of them? Anybody wondering that? Well, it happened on my mother's side of the family. So my mother's father, Frederick Douglass III, was Frederick Douglass's great-grandson. And her mother, Nettie Hancock Washington, was Booker T. Washington's granddaughter. And my grandparents met in 1941 at Tuskegee Normal School and Institute, which is a school that Booker T. Washington founded in 1881 at the age of 25 years old. Do we have some Tuskegee alum? All right. Well, we're family. My grandparents happened to be on campus the same day when they were rushing across to get to the other side and literally bumped into each other. Didn't know that the other descended from an historic family, and they fell in love at first sight and wound up getting married 3 months later. So it truly was a love story. Now, I'm the father of 2 daughters, and I definitely don't recommend, and for you students that are out here, that you get married having only known somebody for 3 months, but I think that there was a plan in place. Now, I'm honored to be here this afternoon to represent the family of Frederick Douglass. We are humbled by the renaming of this field in his honor. I'd like to thank Chancellor Nancy Cantor, her leadership team, faculty, staff, and the students of this great university. And thanks to Marsha Brown for all of the work that you've done. I was on those email chains, and there were a lot of them. I give special thanks to my friend and FDFI board member Todd Allen for uncovering this history of Frederick Douglass and abolition in Newark. We would not be here today if it weren't for Todd's passion, commitment, and diligent research. We are grateful for the collaboration between Todd and Rutgers Newark historians, including Noel Williams, yes, Natalie Borisovitz, I'm sorry. And then, of course, the Clement A. Price Institute on Ethnicity, Culture, and Modern Experience. The dedication of this field today and the impact it will have on this community and beyond is not just about history and the past. It's also about the present and future. History lives in each of us. It doesn't just live in me because I descend from 2 people that we've heard of, but it lives in each and every one of you. And we all stand on the shoulders and walk in the shoes of those that came before us. And each of us has the blood of heroes and heroines flowing through our veins. Our ancestors may have given up their lives just for the freedoms that we enjoy. Our ancestors may have given up their lives just so that some of us even have a right to sit in a classroom and get an education. And I had a 10-year-old girl say to me a few years ago, she was so excited to tell me and share this information. She said, "Mr. Morris, I researched my family tree and I found that my four greats grandmother, thought I had a lot of greats, was born into slavery. She taught herself to read and write in secret, and then she ran away and she became a successful businesswoman and a philanthropist, and she used that word. And she said, so, Mr. Morris, do you know what all of this means?" And before I had a chance to respond, she said, "It means I have greatness flowing through my veins, just like you do." We all descend from somebody that made a difference. Having knowledge of our history helps to inform our past, present, and future. History is not merely to be recalled for the sake of recollection, but it is to be remembered in part to help us understand and navigate the world in which we live. We need to know where we come from in order to know where we're headed. How we interpret our past profoundly determines how we perceive ourselves and our future. Near the end of the great abolitionist's life, a young man approached him in the street and asked him for advice. He said, "What would you say to someone who's interested in joining the fight for justice and equality?" And according to the story, without hesitation, Douglass responded, "Agitate, agitate, agitate." This response captures his life's work. He spoke truth to power. He railed against the hypocrisy of a slave-holding Christianity that promoted ideals of freedom, liberty, and equality while enslaving human beings on the blood-drenched soil of the Americas. He pressed Abraham Lincoln to do better and to move quicker toward the abolition of slavery. We should all take pride in knowing that we stand on the shoulders of the giants in the struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. Frederick Douglass was the first African American nominated for Vice President of the United States. He was the first African American ambassador and consul general to Haiti, the first African American recorder of deeds for the District of Columbia, the first African American U.S. Marshal, and the list goes on and on and on. And people would see him later in life as this white-haired statesman, and they would say, "Frederick, I need to know, where did you go to school? Where did you get your education?" And that, having never spent one day of his life in a classroom, he would respond on occasion by saying, "My degree is written on my back." Frederick had to steal his education. At the age of 9, he was taken from a plantation on the eastern shore of Maryland where he had been born into slavery to go to Baltimore to be the house servant for his master's brother. Now, the importance of this move was he was leaving in an environment where he was not able to learn how to read and write, and he was going to go to the big city where he would be around free black children and poor white children. But what happened most importantly when he got to Baltimore was his slave mistress had never had a slave before. She was a kind Christian lady, and she didn't know that it was illegal to teach him to read and write. She saw this bright boy, and so she began to teach young Frederick his ABCs. And that's all he needed, was that little spark of light into his mental darkness. But when his master found out about the teachings, he forbade the lessons, and he looked at his wife and he looked at Frederick and he said, "You cannot teach a slave how to read and write, because if you do, it will unfit him to be a slave." And Frederick looked at his master, and he knew right then and there that knowledge is power. That's a message that we hear today. And education equals freedom. Education equals emancipation. Education equals liberation. And as he went on to teach himself, he started to think critically about the world around him. And he started doing things that the master didn't want him to do. And we would ask questions like, "Why am I a slave? And why do you own me? And how come you know your birthday and I don't know my birthday?" And then he would turn to God and he would pray to God for deliverance from his bondage. But he would say, "God, I don't understand how my master puts on a suit every Sunday, goes to church, and in the Word and the Bible and cherry-pick verses in Scripture finds justification to brutalize, dehumanize, rape, pillage, and plunder and exploit his property." He started to differentiate between what he would later call the slave-holding Christianity of the land versus the pure, peaceable, impartial Christianity of Christ. Now, his legacy and the legacy of many other heroes and heroines are tangible examples for young people who are struggling, young people that are struggling in communities. We're living at a time in a political climate where the divisive rhetoric and the hatred and the vitriol and the divisiveness. And I think if Frederick Douglass were here today, he would be pleased that we've had a first African American president. He would be pleased that there had been some progress, but he would also recognize that there's a long, long way to go. History lives in each of us because we are the sons and daughters. We're the grandsons and granddaughters. Some of us are the products of slavery. This country is the product of slavery, but it's also the product of the abolition of slavery. And from Frederick Douglass, we learned that we have a right to be free. And from Booker T. Washington, we learned how to make our way in the world as free citizens. And from Martin Luther King Jr., we learned that as free citizens, we have the same rights as all citizens. When I was growing up, the challenges faced by great men like my ancestors were apparent to me because it just so happens their blood flows through my veins. But the fact is, all of us, we live far from the cotton fields. And we're worried more about our favorite sports team winning a ball game on Sunday than we are about the threat of being beaten by our overseers. We live in modern times, and the echoes of slavery are hard to hear from where we stand. But if we all listen close enough, we'll hear cries and not echoes from all of the young people out there that need hope, need inspiration, need to know that they have greatness flowing through their veins. And when we listen close enough, that's when change will happen. History lives in each of us, but the future depends on how we carry that forth. Thank you.